The clock was stealing her breath. Maribel Cross stood in front of the cracked mirror in her tenement room, watching the sky darken outside the single window. The glass was cold against her fingertips. Outside, New York City hummed with the sound of wagon wheels and factory whistles. The same city that had already decided her fate hours before the sun would rise. She had less than 12 hours. By dawn, she would belong to someone. The system didn't call it that. It had prettier names. The elders used words like placement and union. But Maribel had watched enough women disappear into men's territories to know the truth. She had seen what happened when a female Omega stood unmarked at sunrise. The pack didn't ask for consent. They demanded order. They demanded control. Her hands shook as she twisted her dark hair into a knot at the back of her neck. 23 years old, and the life she'd been promised, the one they said she should want, felt like drowning in reverse. Slow, inevitable, impossible to stop. The knock came at the door. Maribel. Her mother's voice carried the weight of resignation. They're asking if you're ready. Ready. As if a woman could be ready to be handed over like property. Coming, she called back, but she didn't move. Instead, she looked at her reflection. Really looked. She saw the fear she couldn't hide, the determination she was trying to gather, the girl who had been raised to obey, and the woman inside her who was running out of time to refuse. The auctioneer's men had already arrived. She'd heard them downstairs, their voices heavy with the confidence of wolves who owned territory and expected ownership to expand. They'd be ranking her now, assessing her, calculating what she might be worth to the strongest bidders, a rare Omega from the lower districts. No family with real power, no connections to leverage, clean genetics. In their eyes, she was inventory. Maribel turned from the mirror and moved toward the door, but her feet felt like they belonged to someone else. Each step was mechanical. Each breath was borrowed. The stairwell was narrow and dark, lit only by a single gas lamp that flickered at the landing. The smell of the city seeped through the walls. Coal smoke, horse manure, the iron tang of the docks. This was where she'd grown up. This tenement block, this neighborhood of wolves without rank or territory. Wolves who survived by accepting the hierarchy instead of fighting it. Her mother stood at the bottom of the stairs, wringing her hands. She was small, worn, with the same dark hair as Maribel, but eyes that had learned long ago not to want things. The buyers are in the front room, her mother whispered. There are 4 of them, strong packs. One of them has connections to the Northern Territory. Northern Territory. That meant distance. That meant being taken far from the only home she'd ever known. Maribel's chest tightened. Her mother reached out and gripped her arm. You'll be safe with someone powerful. That's what matters. Safety comes first. But safety wasn't what Maribel felt when she thought about the life ahead. Being chosen by a man whose face she wouldn't know, whose hands she'd have to obey, whose territory would become her prison dressed up as protection. She wanted to scream. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to ask her mother how she'd accepted this, how she'd learned to call captivity by another name. Instead, she nodded. The front room was thick with male presence. 4 alphas sat at the table where her family ate their meals, their bodies taking up space like claims. They didn't acknowledge her when she entered. They stared at her the way merchants stared at goods they were considering purchasing. One of them had scars across his jaw. Another was older, gray at the temples, with eyes that looked like they'd seen violence and decided they enjoyed it. The third was broad and silent. The fourth, the youngest, had a smile that made her skin crawl. She's small, the scarred one said. Compact, her mother offered quickly. Strong bloodline. Her grandmother. Bloodline doesn't matter if she can't carry, the older one interrupted. How many heats has she gone through? Maribel felt her face burn. This was the conversation they had about livestock. 6, her mother answered. Healthy cycles. Responsive. The word responsive hung in the air like a threat. The youngest alpha finally looked directly at Maribel. He smiled wider. Come here. Every instinct in her body screamed to refuse. Every survival instinct told her to obey. She stepped forward. He reached out and pressed his palm against her neck, feeling her scent glands. His skin was warm and claiming, and she could feel the alpha in him trying to project dominance, trying to mark her with his presence even before the mark was real. This was her life if she stayed. This was her future if she didn't fight. The realization hit her like a hammer. She pulled away from his hand and turned toward the door. "Where are you going?" Her mother's voice cracked. Maribel didn't answer. She couldn't, because if she opened her mouth, she'd say something that would get her beaten or worse. So instead, she walked out of that room, down the tenement stairs and into the New York night. The streets were crowded even at this hour. Workers heading to the night shifts at the factories. Other wolves moving through the shadows. The city didn't care who she was or what she was running from. It simply swallowed her whole. She walked without direction, letting her feet choose the path. The industrial side of the city emerged around her. Brick warehouses, metal railings, the smell of coal and rust. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She had hours left, and no idea how to survive them. That was when she saw him. He sat near an iron fence outside a closed tailor shop. Coat frayed at the seams, boots split at the heels. Dark hair shadowed his eyes. His posture held no challenge, no claim. Other wolves passed him without flinching, without acknowledgement. No scent of rank, no territorial weight, no danger, a nobody, exactly what she needed. Maribel stopped in front of him. Her legs felt weak, her breathing still jagged from the run. The man didn't look up immediately. He was staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else, like he was trying to remember what they were for. Up close, she could see the wear on him, not just in his clothes, but in the way he held himself. Like the world had already decided he wasn't worth noticing. His scent reached her first. It wasn't the sharp, territorial musk of an alpha. It wasn't the nervous edge of a beta. It was something else entirely. Rain, iron, something like a storm locked behind closed doors. The scent should have been repulsive to her omega instincts, an unclaimed male without rank or status. Instead, it made her pause. There was no dominance in that scent, no threat. He finally looked up at her, and his eyes were the color of winter. Gray, cold, empty in a way that suggested he'd learned not to expect anything from the world. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was low and steady, worn smooth by years of not being heard. It didn't carry the weight of command. It carried the weight of invisibility. Maribel's hands shook. She forced them still. "I need a mark by dawn." The words hung between them like a confession she hadn't meant to make. His gaze sharpened in a way that didn't match his appearance. For a moment, just a flicker, something moved behind those empty eyes. Recognition, understanding. Something that looked almost like pain. "No," he said immediately. She had expected questions, negotiation, the kind of curiosity that came with opportunity, not refusal, not from someone who looked like he had nothing left to lose. "You don't even know why," she said. "I don't need to. You don't understand what happens if I'm unclaimed." "I understand exactly," he replied. That unsettled her more than if he had shown fear. How could he understand? How could a man like this, a nobody, an invisible wolf, comprehend what it meant to be auctioned off before dawn? Unless he'd seen it happen. Unless he'd watched women disappear into territories they didn't choose. She swallowed hard. The desperation she'd been holding at bay rose like bile in her throat. "Then you know I don't have another option," she said. "You do. Not one that doesn't put a collar around my throat." His jaw tightened. She watched the muscle work beneath his skin, watched him wrestle with something she couldn't name. She stepped closer. The distance between them contracted. She could see the stubble on his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead. He was taller than she'd realized, his presence quiet but heavy in a way that had nothing to do with dominance. It was more like gravity, like something pulling her toward him without intention. "You're alone," she said. "No pack, no territory. No one would care if you marked me. You wouldn't be challenged. You wouldn't be hunted. We'd disappear." "We?" he repeated. The word came out like he'd never heard it before in that context, like the idea of being part of something, of being bound to anyone, was foreign enough to require translation. "Yes," she said. "You and me." Silas stood. When he moved, she understood why people looked away from him. He didn't project power like the men downstairs had. He moved like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible, like invisibility had become a habit he couldn't break. "No," he said again. Her frustration cracked open inside her chest. "You don't get it," she said, her voice rising. "By morning, they decide who owns me. By morning, I stop being a person and become a piece of their territory. You're the only one who can change that." "I can't." "Why not?" "What do you have to lose?" He looked away from her, and she saw his hands clench into fists at his sides. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You have no idea what you're asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking." The silence pressed between them like a weight. She could hear the city around them, the distant rumble of a train, the shuffle of feet on pavement, the creak of iron. But in their small circle, there was only the sound of her breathing and his, both uneven, both heavy. She reached for his coat. The fabric was thin, worn through at the elbows. Her fingers closed around the material like it was the only solid thing in a world that was collapsing. "I'll do anything," she whispered. His hand closed around her wrist, not roughly, but firmly, with enough pressure that she understood that he could stop her if he wanted to. If he allowed himself to want anything at all. "You don't understand what you're asking," he said again. But this time his voice had changed. It carried something beneath the refusal, something that sounded almost like longing. She looked up at him. Their faces were close now, close enough that she could see the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, the way her omega instincts were responding to his presence, despite all logic telling her he was nothing, nobody, safe. "I know exactly what I'm asking," she said. Her voice didn't break this time. It was steady. It was certain. It was the voice of a woman who had run out of options and time and was willing to take whatever came next. He stared at her like she'd just asked him to burn down the city. "If I mark you," he said slowly, "I won't live to see the sunrise." The words landed between them like a stone dropped into still water, ripples spreading outward, consequences expanding, everything shifting. She froze. What?" "You heard me." She laughed weakly, the sound breaking in the middle. "That's not funny." "I'm not joking." Her fear twisted into anger. It came from somewhere deep inside her, some place she'd been taught to hide. The rage of a woman who'd been told her entire life that survival meant accepting a cage. "You're already nothing," she said, the words tearing out of her. "What do you have left to lose?" The sentence landed between them like a blade. Silas let go of her wrist, and for the first time, something in his eyes cracked. Her words hung in the air like smoke. Silas stared at her, and she watched something shift behind his eyes. Not anger, not fear. Something closer to resignation. The look of a man who'd already made peace with an ending and didn't expect to be reminded of it. "You should leave," he said quietly. But he didn't move away from her. Maribel's breath came shallow. The rage that had propelled her forward was already burning away, leaving something else in its place. Something that felt dangerously close to understanding. He wasn't refusing her because he didn't care. He was refusing her because he cared too much about what it would cost him. The irony twisted inside her chest. "Why?" she asked. "Why would marking me kill you?" He turned away from her completely, breaking the thread of connection that had been holding them in that moment. His shoulders tensed as he moved, and she noticed the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides like he was fighting against his own instincts. "It doesn't matter," he said. "It matters to me. It shouldn't." She stepped forward again, her body moving before her mind could catch up. The pull toward him was becoming harder to deny. It wasn't the frantic, aggressive pull of a mating bond. It was something slower, something that felt like gravity, like he was the center of something and she was falling toward it. "Tell me why," she said. He was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. The city continued around them, the distant hum of machinery, the occasional shout of a worker heading toward the night shift. But in their small circle of space, there was only the sound of his breathing and hers, both heavy, both unsteady. "Because some curses are earned," he finally said. The words were cryptic enough to be a refusal and honest enough to be a confession. She could hear the weight beneath them, the burden of knowing something that couldn't be unknown. A curse? She repeated. He still wasn't looking at her. He was staring out toward the street, toward the darkness where the city swallowed everything whole. His profile was sharp in the weak light of the gas lamp, and she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "There's no point in explaining," he said. "You need to go back. You need to choose one of the men waiting for you. At least that way, you survive." The suggestion hit her like a physical blow. "You think I want to survive like that?" Her voice rose despite her attempt to keep it steady. "You think surviving means letting someone own me?" "Yes," he said flatly, "because that's how the world works. That's how it's always worked." "Then the world is broken." He finally looked at her, and the expression in his eyes was so sharp it made her step back. There was anger there, and something that looked almost like envy, as if he resented her for still believing that things could be different. "Broken or not, it's the world we live in," he said, "and I won't be the reason you die chasing something that doesn't exist. You don't get to make that choice for me. I already have." She felt the refusal land like a door slamming shut between them. But even as he turned away from her again, she could see the tension in his body, the way he held himself like he was 1 second away from cracking. The invisible war he was fighting with himself, wanting to refuse her and wanting something else entirely. The chemistry between them was burning under his restraint. It was in the way he wouldn't look at her. It was in the deliberate distance he was maintaining. It was in the rawness of his voice when he spoke, like every word was costing him something he couldn't afford to lose. Maribel's mind raced. Time was running out. The sky was still dark, but it wouldn't be dark forever. By the time the sun touched the horizon, she'd either be marked or owned. There was no third option. There was no escape route that didn't lead through him. She thought about the men downstairs, the way the youngest one smiled, the way his hand had felt on her neck, possessive and claiming, and utterly indifferent to whether she wanted to be claimed. She thought about the Northern Territory, about being taken far from everything she knew, about spending the rest of her life in a cage that was carefully decorated to look like a home. And then she thought about this man, about his refusal that sounded like protection, about his curse that sounded like a choice he'd made a long time ago. "What if I don't care?" she asked. "About what?" "About whether I die, about whether it kills you. What if I've already decided that it's worth the cost?" He went very still. She could see the moment her words hit him, could see it in the way his shoulders stiffened, in the way his breath caught. He was fighting against something inside himself, some instinct that wanted to say yes, wanted to give her what she was asking for, wanted to believe that her choice mattered more than his curse. "You're not thinking clearly," he said, but his voice was barely above a whisper. "You're scared and desperate, and you're not thinking." "I'm thinking clearer than I ever have," she said. She closed the distance between them again. This time he didn't move away. He stood there like a man trapped between two impossibilities, and she could feel the war raging inside him. Every muscle in his body was tense. Every instinct was screaming at him to either run or give in. "My name is Maribel Cross," she said. "I'm 23 years old. I've lived my entire life being told what I should want and who I should be, and I'm done. I'm done pretending that survival is the same as living." She reached out and took his hand. His skin was warm and rough, and she could feel him trembling, just slightly, just enough to tell her that her touch was affecting him as much as his presence was affecting her. "If the only way to be free is to die," she whispered, "then at least I'll choose how it happens. At least I'll choose with whom." He looked down at their joined hands like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. "You're asking me to destroy myself," he said. "I'm asking you to destroy the system that built the cage I was born in," she corrected. "There's a difference." For a moment, just a breath, just a heartbeat, she thought he might do it. She thought she saw him considering it, weighing the cost of his refusal against the cost of her continued captivity. Then footsteps echoed from somewhere deeper in the industrial district. Voices, male voices, moving closer. Silas's grip on her hand tightened. He pulled her without hesitation, moving deeper into the shadows between the buildings. The footsteps grew louder. Multiple men, their voices rough with authority. Garrick's wolves. Pack enforcers. The ones sent to drag her back to the auction if she tried to run. She hadn't expected them this fast. Maribel's pulse hammered in her throat as Silas led her through a narrow gap between two brick warehouses. The space was barely wide enough for one person, barely wide enough for the two of them, pressed close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Close enough that his scent surrounded her completely, rain and iron, and something that made her chest ache. He pulled her deeper into the darkness until the voices behind them became distant echoes. They didn't stop moving. He navigated the industrial maze with the certainty of someone who'd spent a long time learning how to disappear. Down an alley, through a passage, behind a shuttered storefront. Each turn took them further from the sound of pursuit, further from the world that wanted to own her. Finally, they stopped in what looked like an abandoned loading dock. The space was cavernous and empty, lit only by the faint glow of moonlight filtering through broken windows. Crates were stacked against one wall. The smell of coal dust and old wood filled the air. Silas released her hand. Maribel immediately felt the absence of his touch like a physical loss. She was breathing hard, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and fear, and something she didn't have a name for. She stepped toward the window, keeping her eyes on the street below, half expecting to see their pursuers emerge from the shadows. Nothing. Just the empty street and the sound of the city continuing on like nothing had changed. Like her entire world hadn't just shifted on its axis. "They'll search the district," Silas said behind her. His voice was steady, but she could hear the strain beneath it, the effort it was taking him to maintain control. "They'll check the tenements, the dockyards, the safe houses. They won't check here." "How do you know?" she asked. "Because no one comes here." She turned to face him. In the darkness, she could barely make out his features, just the outline of him, the shadow of his presence. But she could feel him the way a compass feels north, an invisible pull that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with instinct. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you help me?" He didn't answer immediately. She watched him move to the far corner of the loading dock and sink down against the wall like his legs had finally given out. The strain of the last few minutes was catching up with him. "I didn't help you," he said. "I just moved you out of immediate danger. There's a difference." "Stop lying." Her voice cracked on the words. She was exhausted, terrified, running on nothing but adrenaline and the fading hope that there was a way out of this that didn't end in one of their deaths. She crossed the loading dock and sat down next to him. Not close, but close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Close enough that she could feel the tremor in his breathing. "You could have left me there," she said. "You could have walked away. You could have pretended you never saw me. But you didn't. Because I'm a fool," he said bitterly. "Because you care." He turned his head to look at her, and even in the darkness, she could see the rawness in his expression, the way her words had cut through whatever walls he'd built around himself. "Caring doesn't change anything," he said. "It just makes things hurt more." "Is that what happened to you?" she asked. "Is that why your curse exists? Because you cared about something?" The silence stretched between them. She could feel him wrestling with whether to answer, could feel the weight of secrets he'd been carrying alone for so long that they'd become part of his bones. "I cared about power once," he finally said. "I cared about control, about building something that would last, about creating order out of chaos. And it cost you everything." "Yes." The single word held an ocean of pain. She wanted to ask what had happened, wanted to understand the curse that bound him, but she could sense that he'd given her as much as he could manage. Pushing harder would only make him shut down. Instead, she shifted slightly so that her shoulder touched his. He didn't pull away. They sat like that in the darkness of the loading dock, listening to the sounds of the city continuing outside, listening to the occasional patrol pass by without finding them, listening to the silence between them that felt less like emptiness and more like understanding. "We don't have much time," Maribel said. "Once the sun rises, my scent will be everywhere. They'll track it. They'll find this place." "I know. So what do we do?" He was quiet for a long moment. She could feel him thinking. could feel the war happening inside him between what he wanted and what he believed was right. "We leave the city," he finally said. "If we move now before dawn, we can be on the northern train line by first light. Once you're outside the eastern territories, you're beyond their jurisdiction." "And you?" she asked. She felt rather than saw him tense beside her. "I'll take you as far as the train station," he said. "Then I'll come back. I'll make sure they understand that you left alone, that I had nothing to do with it." "You're lying again." "Yes." At least he admitted it this time. Maribel turned to face him fully. In the weak moonlight, she could see the exhaustion carved into his features. The weight of impossible choices, the resignation of a man who'd already decided to sacrifice himself. "What's your name?" she asked. He blinked as if the question caught him off guard, as if no one had bothered to ask him such a simple thing in a very long time. "Silas," he said. "Silas Crown." She reached out and took his hand again. This time he didn't resist. His fingers closed around hers like he was holding on to something that might disappear if he didn't grip hard enough. "I won't forget you," she whispered. "You should," he said. "You should forget this entire night and choose one of those men waiting for you. Choose survival." "I'm choosing you." He closed his eyes like her words caused him physical pain. Outside, the first hints of dawn began to creep across the horizon. Time was running out. Maribel could feel it in the way the darkness was thinning at the edges of the loading dock. The sky beyond the broken windows was shifting from black to deep blue. Soon it would be gray. Then the gold of sunrise would bleed across the rooftops, and every wolf in the eastern territories would be able to track her scent. Silas stood abruptly, pulling his hand away from hers. She felt the loss immediately, a sudden coldness that had nothing to do with the temperature of the warehouse. He moved toward the window, his silhouette sharp against the lightening sky, and she watched the tension return to his shoulders. The walls he'd let crack were sealing themselves shut again. "We need to move," he said. "The station is 6 blocks east. If we leave now—" "Tell me," she interrupted. "Tell you what?" "The truth. All of it, not pieces. Not half answers. Everything." He didn't turn around. She could see his hands clench into fists at his sides. "There's no time for stories," he said. "Then talk fast." The silence stretched between them. She could feel him calculating the cost of honesty versus the cost of continuing to lie. Could feel him weighing whether she deserved to understand what she was asking him to do. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I used to be something," he said. "A long time ago. Before this." He gestured vaguely at himself, at the frayed coat and split boots, and the invisibility that clung to him like a second skin. "What were you?" "King." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Maribel's breath caught. She waited for him to continue. But he seemed to be gathering pieces of a story he'd spent years trying to forget. "The Eastern Territories weren't always fractured," he continued. "There was a time when they were unified, when one authority held all the power. I was that authority." She stood and moved toward him slowly, as if sudden movements might shatter whatever courage it was taking him to speak. "What happened?" she asked. "Wars," he said flatly. "Constant wars. Every victory created another rebellion. Every conquest created new enemies. The more territory I controlled, the more wolves wanted to take it from me. I was spending my entire existence fighting to keep something that was destroying everything around it." He turned to face her, and she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of decisions made and lives lost. "So I ended it," he said. "I made a choice. I went to the oldest wolves still alive, and I asked them to bind me. With a curse. Yes, a covenant. 3 things happened when they bound me. My wolf was stripped away. I could no longer shift unless someone claimed me. My presence was erased. My scent, my authority, my weight in the world became invisible. And if I ever marked another again—" He paused and she heard the pain in his voice. "If I ever marked another again, the Alpha King would die at dawn." She felt the words like a physical blow. "You knew," she whispered. "When I asked you, you already knew what it would cost." "Yes, and you still helped me." "I wasn't supposed to," he said, his voice cracking. "That was the entire point of the curse. It was supposed to make me unable to help anyone. It was supposed to keep me from ever wielding power again. But the curse only works if I mark for possession, If I mark to claim ownership, it doesn't account for—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "For what?" she pressed. "For marking someone free," he said quietly. "For giving power instead of taking it. For choosing to destroy the system that created the need for the curse in the first place." Maribel's mind was racing. She was trying to understand the implications of what he was telling her. The curse bound him to prevent him from ever creating another kingdom. But what he was describing was the opposite of creating a kingdom. It was breaking one. "How long have you been like this?" she asked. "Years. Long enough that I've forgotten what it felt like to be heard. Long enough that I've learned to accept being invisible. And when you mark me, I'll die," he said simply. "Not as punishment, as consequence. The curse is programmed to destroy any Alpha King who tries to wield power again, regardless of the intention. It doesn't understand the difference between marking to own and marking to free. It only understands that a king is marking an omega, and the old law says that has to be answered with death." She stepped closer to him. "Unless—" "There is no unless," he said. "I've had years to think about this. I've looked for loopholes. There aren't any." "Then don't mark me," she said. "There has to be another way. There has to be—" "There isn't," he interrupted. "Your pack will find you. They'll bring you back. And if you keep refusing, they'll beat you until you stop refusing. I've seen it happen. I've watched women break under that kind of pressure." She flinched at the rawness in his voice. He'd watched it happen. Maybe he'd even allowed it to happen when he was king. "So your solution is to die?" "My solution is to give you what no one else will," he said. "Freedom. Real freedom. Not the kind that comes with a cage around it. Not the kind that requires you to obey someone else's rules. The kind that costs everything." Maribel felt tears burning in her eyes. She refused to let them fall. "That's not fair," she said. "That's not justice. That's just sacrifice." "Yes, I don't want your sacrifice." "I know," he said, "but you need it, and I've already made peace with the cost." She could hear the finality in his voice. He'd made this decision long before she'd found him sitting outside that tailor's shop. He'd chosen this path the moment he'd accepted the curse. Everything after that was just waiting for someone desperate enough to make him fulfill it. Outside, the sky continued to lighten. The first rays of dawn were touching the tops of the buildings across the street. In minutes, the sun would rise completely. In minutes, her scent would become a beacon that led every wolf in the city directly to her. "There's no more time," Silas said. "We have to go now. We have to get to the station before—" "Before what?" she asked. "Before you mark me? Before Garrick's men find us." But she could hear the lie in his voice. He wasn't worried about being found. He was worried about having to go through with this. He was worried that if they had more time together, more time for her to understand what was about to happen, she might choose a different path. She reached out and took both of his hands. "Look at me," she said. He did. "When you mark me," she said quietly, "it won't kill the Alpha King. It'll free him. Do you understand? The curse was designed to prevent you from ever building power again. But you're not building power. You're giving it away. You're breaking the cycle that created the need for the curse in the first place." "You don't know that," he said. "No," she agreed. "I don't. But neither do you." The sky continued to lighten. "Neither do you," she repeated. The words hung between them like a prayer neither of them was sure would be answered. Silas's hands trembled in hers. She could feel the war happening inside him, the part of him that wanted to believe her, and the part of him that had already accepted death as the price of freedom. "Even if you're right," he said hoarsely, "even if the curse breaks instead of killing me, we don't have time to test that theory. We need to leave. Now." But he didn't pull away from her. She stepped closer. The loading dock was filling with light now, pale and gray, but light nonetheless. In another few minutes, the sun would breach the horizon completely. In another few minutes, everything would change. "I'm not going to the station," she said. "Yes, you are." "No," she said firmly. "I'm not running. I'm not hiding. I'm not pretending that leaving the city solves anything, because it doesn't. I'd spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. I'd spend the rest of my life knowing that somewhere, the system that created this auction is still running, still destroying women like me. He stared at her like she'd suggested something impossible. What are you saying? I'm saying that if I'm going to do this, she said, if I'm going to let you mark me, then we're going to do it here. We're going to do it now. We're going to do it before your fear talks you out of it again. Maribel, and we're going to do it in the open, she continued. We're going to do it where Garrick's men can see it, where the pack can see it, where everyone in the Eastern Territories can feel the shift happen. His grip on her hands tightened. You're asking me to make myself visible again. I'm asking you to stop hiding, she said. I'm asking you to trust that maybe, just maybe, the curse you've been carrying isn't a punishment. Maybe it was always meant to be a choice. She could see the moment something shifted in his eyes, the moment hope and terror warred inside him, and neither one won. Instead of responding, he pulled her against him. It wasn't rough. It wasn't demanding. His hands came up to frame her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything she'd learned about alpha wolves. His thumbs traced the curve of her cheekbones like he was trying to memorize her, like he was trying to imprint her into his bones before dawn stole her away. If I'm wrong, he whispered, if this kills me and you're left alone, I won't be alone, she said, because I'll be queen. He closed his eyes. She could feel him breathing, feel the way his body was holding on to her, like she was the only solid thing in a world that was collapsing. And then he leaned down and his forehead touched hers. The contact was electric. It wasn't a kiss. It was something more intimate than that. It was a moment of complete vulnerability between two people who were about to do something irreversible. She could feel his heartbeat through the thin fabric of his shirt, could feel the way his pulse matched hers, racing, terrified, determined. I'm scared, he said against her skin. I know. I'm scared that I'll fail you, that the curse will take me and leave you unprotected. You won't fail me, she said. You stopped failing people the moment you accepted the curse. Everything after that has been you trying to make amends for a kingdom you no longer wanted to rule. He pulled back just enough to look at her. In the growing light of dawn, she could see every line of his face, every scar, every mark of suffering and resilience. He looked like a man who'd been broken and had learned to live with the pieces. Why do you believe in me? He asked. You don't even know me. I know enough, she said. I know that you were willing to walk away from power. I know that you chose to become nothing rather than continue to be everything. I know that when I was desperate and alone, you didn't turn me away. That's enough. His hands moved from her face to her shoulders, pulling her closer. She could smell him more intensely now. Rain and iron in the storm that had been locked behind closed doors for so long. The scent was becoming familiar, becoming hers. If this works, he said, if the curse breaks instead of killing me, it will work, she interrupted. But if it does, he continued, you'll be queen. You understand that? You'll have to lead. You'll have to make choices that affect thousands of lives. You'll have to be strong in ways that I stopped being strong years ago. I know. And you're willing to take that? She nodded. He breathed out like he was releasing something he'd been holding for years. Then he moved his hands to her neck. She felt his fingers trace the delicate curve where her shoulder met her collarbone, where the mark would go. Tell me your name, he whispered. Tell me again so I know what I'm choosing. Maribel Cross, she said. I'm the woman who's going to change everything. He made a sound that was almost a laugh, broken and desperate and beautiful. Yes, he said. You are. She could feel him positioning himself, could feel the way his body was moving into the ancient ritual that had been encoded into wolf DNA for centuries. The claiming, the binding. The mark that would transfer everything he was into what she would become. Outside, the sun was touching the edge of the horizon. The city below was beginning to wake. Wolves were emerging from their territories, preparing for the day. Soon, very soon, Garrick's men would find them. Soon the choice would be made for them. But in this moment, in this single stretch of time before dawn broke completely, there was only Maribel and Silas. There was only the space between one heartbeat and the next. There was only the fragile tenderness of two broken people choosing to become something new together. I'm going to mark you now, he said, and I want you to know that whatever happens next, whatever the curse does or doesn't do, I chose this. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. I know, she whispered. She tilted her head, exposing her neck fully to him, an act of ultimate submission and ultimate trust. She could feel his breath warm against her skin, could feel the moment he pulled her close enough that there was no space left between them. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry for all of it, for the system that put you in danger, for every woman who came before you, for—" "Don't apologize," she said. "Just mark me. Just make me queen." His teeth grazed her skin. The pain when it came was vast. It wasn't the sharp, aggressive pain of a predator's bite. It was something deeper, something that felt like the old world was tearing away and a new one was being born in its place. She gasped, and he held her closer, his body shielding hers as the mark seared itself into her flesh. Power flooded through her veins like liquid fire. She could feel it, the territories, the hierarchies, the weight of authority that had been his now flowing into her. Every pack instinct, every dormant command, every line of succession suddenly recognizing a new ruler. Below them in the city, wolves staggered. Some dropped to their knees. Others gasped as if the air itself had changed. Maribel felt it the moment the mark settled into her skin. The power didn't stop flowing. It kept coming, wave after wave, like an ocean that refused to recede. She could feel the territories, all of them. She could feel the packs bending, the hierarchies shifting, the authority that had been fragmented across decades suddenly consolidating under one presence, under hers. She tried to breathe through it, but the sensation was overwhelming. It was too much, too vast, too heavy for a body that had been raised to be small and quiet and obedient. She pulled away from Silas. His hands fell from her neck, and she staggered backward, her legs unsteady. The loading dock spun around her. Or maybe she was the one spinning. Maybe she was falling through space, and the world was holding still. "Maribel," his voice came from far away, or maybe it was right beside her. She couldn't tell anymore. "Look at me. Stay with me." She forced her eyes to focus on him. That was when she saw it. His skin was changing color. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in a way that made her blood run cold. The edges of his features were becoming translucent, fading, like he was slowly becoming less real. "No," she whispered. "It's happening," he said, and his voice sounded strange, echoed, like it was coming from underwater. "The curse it's taking me." No, you said maybe the curse would break. You said maybe—" "I was wrong," he said simply, but he was smiling. Even as he was fading, even as the sun was beginning to fully rise outside the broken windows, he was smiling like he'd just been given a gift he'd been waiting for. "This is what I wanted," he said. "This is why I accepted the curse in the first place. To end. To finally end." She reached for him, but her hands passed through his body like he was already a ghost. The realization hit her with physical force. He was already fading, already becoming invisible again, except this time it was different. This time it wasn't invisibility, it was erasure. "You said you chose me," she said, her voice breaking. "You said you were choosing this." "I was," he said. "I am. I chose to end so that you could begin. That's not fair." Tears were streaming down her face now. She couldn't stop them. "That's not justice. That's sacrifice, and I don't want your sacrifice. You want me to live," he said. And even as he was disappearing, she could hear the understanding in his voice. "I know, but some things are meant to die so that other things can be born." She could barely see him now, just the faintest outline, the barest suggestion of a shape where a man had been standing moments before. "Tell me I'm wrong," she said desperately. "Tell me the curse is still there. Tell me you're still going to—" "I love you," he said. The words came from everywhere and nowhere, from the air itself, from the light beginning to pour through the broken windows, from the power coursing through her veins that was already reaching out to the city below, claiming territories and hierarchies and the futures of thousands of lives. "I love you," he said again, "and that's why I have to go." And then he was gone, completely gone. Not even an outline left behind, not even a shadow. Just the loading dock and the dust and the rising sun and Maribel standing alone in the middle of it all. the new alpha king of the Eastern Territories, and absolutely, devastatingly alone. The silence was unbearable. She could feel the city responding to her presence now. Every wolf in a 10-block radius was dropping to their knees. The power was automatic, instinctive, burned into their DNA at a level deeper than consciousness. She didn't have to command it, didn't have to demand it. It simply was. She was queen. And it had cost everything. Maribel sank to her knees on the cold concrete floor of the loading dock. Her body was shaking. Her mind was fracturing. She could feel Silas everywhere and nowhere. In the mark on her neck that was still burning, in the power that was flowing through her veins, in the absence that was now the loudest presence in the room. He had lied to her. He had known. All along he had known that the curse wouldn't break. That hope was a weapon he'd wielded against his own survival. He had looked her in the eye and let her believe that maybe, just maybe, he would live through this. And he had chosen differently. He had chosen to die. Below in the streets of New York, she could feel the packs mobilizing. Garrick's men were running toward the loading dock. They could feel the power shift. They understood that something had changed, that the invisible wolf had become visible long enough to transfer his crown, and now he was gone. The door to the loading dock burst open. Garrick's men flooded in, but they didn't attack. They stopped in their tracks, every one of them dropping to one knee before she even lifted her head. The power emanating from her was too strong, too immediate, too absolute for them to do anything but submit. She stood slowly. Her legs were unsteady, but her voice was clear when she spoke. "Where is Garrick Hale?" "In the warehouse district, Alpha," one of the men said. His voice shook with the effort of speaking through the compulsion of her authority. "Running the auction. There are 40 men there. 40 bidders waiting for..." "For what?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "For the Omega that ran," the man finished. "They're waiting for her. The auctions can't proceed without her. The system requires..." "The system is over," she said. The words felt strange in her mouth. Too large. Too powerful. They reverberated through the loading dock like a physical force, and every wolf within earshot felt them as a command written directly into their bones. The system is over. She could feel it happening in real time. The hierarchies collapsing. The old order crumbling. The carefully constructed pyramid of power that had existed for decades was disintegrating because she had willed it to disintegrate. But the victory felt hollow. She looked down at her hands and saw Silas's blood under her fingernails. Not real blood, just the memory of his mark. Just the evidence that he had been here and was no longer. "Take me to Garrick," she said. The men scrambled to comply. She was their queen now, their absolute authority, everything they had been trained to fear and obey since birth. But as she walked toward the door of the loading dock, toward the sunrise that was now fully breaking across the city, she realized that none of it mattered. She had power. She had authority. She had everything she'd asked for, and it had cost her the one person who had understood what that cost would be. The warehouse district smelled like blood and fear, and the acrid smoke of industry that never slept. Maribel could taste it on her tongue as Garrick's men led her through the dark corridors toward the main auction hall. The power inside her was constant now, a second heartbeat, a second breath, a second consciousness that existed separate from her own. She could feel every wolf in the district, could sense their hierarchies and their territories, and their desperate need to understand what had happened, what she had become. The auction hall was enormous. 40 men stood in clusters around a central platform, their conversations cutting off the moment she crossed the threshold. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Every single one of them dropped to one knee, their heads bowed, their alpha pride crushed beneath the weight of her presence. Garrick Hale stood at the far end of the hall. He was older than she'd expected, gray at the temples, scarred, his body still carrying the confidence of a man who'd built power through violence and maintained it through fear. He didn't kneel immediately. He stared at her like he was trying to understand what he was looking at. Then understanding crossed his face and the color drained from his skin. "No," he said. His voice was a whisper, a denial, a prayer. "Silas," he breathed, "you brought back Silas' crown." Maribel didn't correct him. Didn't explain that Silas had brought her here, that the man he feared had chosen to die rather than live with the burden of his own power, that the crown he'd spent years trying to forget about had been placed on the head of someone he'd never met until the night before. Instead, she walked toward him. Every step she took echoed through the warehouse. Every footfall was a drumbeat of inevitability. The other men pressed their foreheads harder against the ground, trying to make themselves smaller, trying to disappear beneath the weight of her presence. Garrick didn't move. He stood there like a man facing the ghost he'd spent decades trying to escape. "You were supposed to be dead," he said. His voice was shaking now, the confidence completely stripped away. "The curse was supposed to... You were supposed to be invisible, powerless, alone." "He was," Maribel said. Her voice sounded different to her own ears. It carried harmonics now, the voice of a woman and something else, something older, something that remembered centuries of authority and kingdoms built on blood. "Until I asked him to be something else." Garrick's eyes shifted to her, really seeing her for the first time. Recognition flickered across his face, not of who she was, but of what she represented. A pawn that had become a player. A woman who'd been meant to be sold and had instead become the one who would do the selling. "The Omega from the auction," he said slowly. "The last one," Maribel corrected, "because there will be no more auctions. There will be no more selling. There will be no more women treated as currency in your territories." His face hardened. "You don't understand what you're doing," he said. "The system exists for a reason. It maintains order. It prevents chaos. It maintains your power," she said. "There's a difference." She was close to him now, close enough to see the fear in his eyes, close enough to see the calculation happening behind his expression. Was there a way out? Was there a way to fight? Was there any path that didn't lead to his own destruction? She could feel him reaching for his wolf, trying to access the power that had always allowed him to dominate. But he couldn't. Her presence was too overwhelming. Her authority too absolute. She'd already claimed the territories before she ever stepped foot in this warehouse. "What do you want?" he asked. The question was simple, but the answer was complicated. What did she want? She wanted Silas back. She wanted to undo the choice he'd made. She wanted to return to the moment before the mark and find a different solution, one that didn't require his sacrifice. But that wasn't an option, so she settled for the next best thing. "I want the women," she said. "Every Omega, every beta female in your territories. I want their names, their locations, their circumstances. And I want you to understand that they no longer belong to anyone but themselves." Garrick's jaw clenched. "That will destroy everything we've built." "Good," she said simply. "Everything you've built is built on suffering. I'm here to dismantle it." She could feel the other men in the warehouse trembling. They understood what was happening. They understood that the old order was dying, and no amount of resistance would stop it. The power flowing through Maribel was too strong, too absolute, too final. But Garrick still didn't kneel. He stared at her with the expression that mixed rage and desperate calculation. He was a predator who'd spent his entire life hunting, and he was facing a predator for the first time. "If I refuse," he asked, "then I take what I need and leave you with nothing," she said. "Your territory, your pack, your authority, all of it reverts to me. And you spend the rest of your life knowing that it was your refusal that cost you everything." The silence stretched between them. She could feel the moment he made his choice. Could feel him calculating that submission was survivable and resistance was not. "The records are in the back office," he said finally. His voice was hollow, defeated. "The women's names, their pack assignments, everything." Maribel didn't smile. She'd expected this response. She'd expected that fear would be more powerful than pride. But the victory felt hollow anyway. It felt like every other victory was destined to feel, like taking pieces of a man and calling it justice. "Show me," she said. She followed him through the warehouse, aware of every eye on her, aware of every wolf following her movements with a mixture of fear and awe. She was their queen now, the Alpha King reborn in a different form. The system that had seemed immovable just hours ago was collapsing beneath the weight of her presence. But as they walked, Her mind kept drifting to the loading dock, to the moment Silas had begun to fade, to the way his smile had remained even as he was disappearing. He had known. All along he had known that the curse wouldn't break, that there was no loophole, that the only way to transfer power was through his own erasure. And he had done it anyway. She wanted to scream at him, wanted to tell him that his sacrifice was unnecessary, that there had to have been another way, that she would have chosen differently if she'd known the cost. But the truth was that she wouldn't have. She would have chosen exactly the same thing. She would have chosen power over him. She would have chosen freedom for thousands of women over keeping one man alive, and that knowledge was heavy enough to crush her. The back office was small and cluttered. Files were stacked on shelves, each one representing a woman's life, each one representing a choice that wasn't hers to make. Maribel gathered them without ceremony. She was acutely aware of Garrick standing behind her, watching his empire crumble in real time. She was aware of the weight of all those names and all those lives depending on her now. "What will you do?" Garrick asked. "With us? With the men who've built this system?" She turned to face him. "You'll work," she said. "You'll use your knowledge of the territories to help me rebuild them. You'll spend your life undoing the damage you've done. And if you refuse, if you try to resist or rebuild what's been broken, I will know, and I will end you." It wasn't a threat, it was a promise written directly into the fabric of the territories themselves. He could feel it the same way all the other wolves could feel it. The new law had been established, the new order had been set, and there was no escaping it. "When did you become this?" he asked. His voice was almost curious now, the fear replaced by something closer to resignation. "In the moment before the sun rose," she said. "In the moment someone gave me power instead of taking it from me." She could feel Silas in that answer, could feel him in every decision she made now, every choice she took. He was gone, erased, invisible, but he was woven into the foundation of her authority now. She would spend the rest of her life carrying his absence like a crown. Outside the warehouse, the sun was fully risen. The city was waking. Wolves were emerging from their territories, sensing the shift. The news would spread quickly through the eastern territories. The old king had returned, but not as they remembered him. He had returned as a woman. He had returned as someone willing to burn everything down in the name of freedom. Maribel clutched the files to her chest. "Take me to the streets," she said to Garrick. "I want to make an announcement. I want everyone to know that the auctions are over. I want every woman in these territories to understand that they are no longer for sale." Garrick nodded slowly. He was broken now, completely broken. And as she watched him move toward the warehouse door, Maribel realized that this was what Silas had been protecting her from. This moment, this knowledge, the understanding that power didn't corrupt, it isolated, that ruling meant making decisions that would haunt her forever. That every choice to save one person was a choice made at the expense of something else. She followed Garrick out into the morning light. Behind her, the files were heavy in her arms. Ahead of her, the city waited. And somewhere in the space between what she'd lost and what she'd gained, Silas' crown was fading completely from existence, becoming the ghost he'd always been meant to be. But his ghost would rule beside her, in every decision, in every boundary she set, in every woman she freed. His absence would be the most powerful force she wielded. Maribel stood on the steps of the old courthouse, the files clutched against her chest, and looked out at the crowd that had gathered. Wolves from every district, omegas who had lived in fear, betas who had accepted the hierarchy without question, alphas who were only now beginning to understand that the world they'd built was crumbling. The morning sun was warm on her face. She could feel it all, the territories responding to her presence, the pack bonds reorganizing themselves, the old system dissolving like fog under heat. But beneath the power there was something else, a hollow ache that wouldn't go away, a space where someone should be standing beside her. Garrick stood to her left, his presence diminished. He was no longer a threat. He was simply a man who would spend the rest of his life rebuilding what he'd destroyed. "I'm dissolving the auctions," she announced. Her voice carried across the courtyard without effort. The power in her made it so that every wolf could hear her, whether they were standing at the front or lingering in the shadows of the brick buildings. It was a command written directly into their bones. Every woman in the Eastern Territories is free to choose her own path. No pack will claim her without her consent. No man will own her. These territories belong to all of us now. Not to the strongest, not to the ones with the most blood on their hands, but to all of us together. She could see the moment understanding spread through the crowd, could see the Omegas lifting their heads, could see the Betas straightening their shoulders, could see the Alphas struggling to accept a world where power wasn't singular anymore. There will be new laws, she continued, laws that protect rather than control, laws that honor choice rather than demand obedience, and I will enforce them with everything I am, because I was bought and sold and almost auctioned off like cattle. And I will never allow that to happen again. The crowd erupted. Some wolves shouted in agreement. Others simply knelt, accepting the new order. The shift was happening in real time, the territories reorganizing themselves around a new center of gravity. But as she watched, Maribel felt something shift inside her too. The weight of the power was becoming clearer now, not crushing, but present, constant. She would carry this for the rest of her life. She would make decisions that would affect thousands of people. She would have to be strong when she wanted to break. She would have to rule when all she wanted to do was mourn. She thought of Silas in the loading dock, of the way he'd smiled as he was fading, of the acceptance in his voice when he'd said goodbye. He had prepared her for this, not with words, but with his example. He had shown her that power could be used to free instead of control, that authority could be wielded with mercy, that sometimes the strongest thing a ruler could do was step aside and let someone else carry the burden. The sun moved across the sky. Hours passed, though time felt strange now. She was aware of it moving, but it felt like it was happening at a different speed for her than for everyone else. The territories were reorganizing themselves. The files were being distributed to a council of women she was assembling. Omegas and Betas, who understood what it meant to be powerless and wanted to ensure no one else experienced that again. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Maribel was standing alone in the old courthouse. The building was quiet now. The noise of the city had faded to a distant hum. She was sitting in what had once been Garrick's office, surrounded by the records of transactions that would never happen again. Each file represented a choice that had been made for someone else. Each name represented a woman who would now get to make her own choices. It was almost enough to make the grief bearable. Almost. She reached up and touched the mark on her neck. It was warm against her fingers. It had stopped burning hours ago, but it was still tender, still raw, still the physical evidence that Silas Crown had existed and had chosen to give up everything for her. A knock came at the door. "Come in," she called. An Omega woman entered, young, maybe a year or two older than Maribel, with dark hair and eyes that had learned how to survive in a system designed to crush her. She was holding a small box. "This was found in the warehouse," the woman said. Her voice was still learning how to speak without fear. "In Silas's old quarters. The men think it belonged to him. They brought it to you." Maribel took the box with trembling hands. It was simple wood, unadorned. She opened it slowly, not sure what she would find, not sure if she was ready to find anything. Inside was a letter. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, like it had taken him a long time to write it. Like he'd had to find words that would survive his own erasure. "Maribel, if you're reading this, then I'm already gone. The curse has taken me, as I always knew it would. But I need you to know that I don't regret it. Not for a single moment. I spent so many years being invisible. So many years hiding from the power that had destroyed everyone around me. I thought invisibility was protection. I thought if I stopped existing, I could stop hurting people. But then you found me, and you asked me for something that wasn't power or control or dominance. You asked me to be free. You asked me to choose. And in choosing you, I finally chose myself. The curse was never meant to be broken. It was meant to be fulfilled. It was meant to end the cycle of kings and kingdoms built on suffering. And I'm honored to be the last one. You ask me why I believe in you. The truth is, I believe in you because you're the first person I've ever met who understood that power isn't something to cling to. It's something to pass on. It's something to use to set people free. Don't mourn me. Celebrate the world you're about to build. Celebrate every woman who gets to choose her own path because you were brave enough to claim authority and use it differently than I ever could. I love you. Not as a mate, though that bond exists. I love you as a woman who taught me that redemption isn't about surviving. It's about transforming. It's about looking at a broken system and having the courage to break it yourself. Be the queen this world needs. Be the one who leads with mercy instead of fear. Be the one who remembers that power is only beautiful when it's used to set people free. And when you're tired, when the weight becomes too heavy, remember that I'm still there. In every boundary you set, in every woman you free, in every choice you make to honor the humanity of the people you lead. I'm not gone, Maribel. I've just become part of something bigger. Yours in freedom. Silas. Maribel read the letter 3 times. On the first read, she wept. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place so far inside her, she didn't know it existed. On the second read, she wept differently, with gratitude and understanding, and the kind of grief that comes with knowing someone truly. On the third read, she was calm, her hands were steady, and she understood what he'd been telling her. He wasn't asking her to forget him. He was asking her to remember him by living the life they'd started together, by building the world he'd believed she could create. The Omega woman was still standing in the doorway, watching carefully. "What's your name?" Maribel asked. "Elena," the woman said softly. "I was supposed to be auctioned off tomorrow, but then everything changed." Maribel stood and walked toward her. "Elena, I'm building a council of women to help me lead these territories. I need people who understand what it means to have power taken from you. People who understand how to give it back. Would you join me?" Elena's eyes widened. "Me," she whispered. "I don't know anything about leading." "Neither did I," Maribel said gently. "But we'll learn together. We'll make mistakes together. And we'll build something that's never existed before. A system where power serves people instead of consuming them." Elena nodded slowly and a smile spread across her face. It was tentative, still learning how to be real, but it was genuine. Outside, the sun was beginning to set completely. The sky had shifted from gold to deep orange to the softest shade of purple. The city lights were beginning to flicker to life, gas lamps and candles and the glow of windows where people were preparing their evening meals, living their lives, unaware of how much had changed. Maribel walked to the window and looked out at the city she now ruled. She could feel the territory settling around her like a mantle, could feel the women beginning to breathe easier, could feel the men beginning to understand that strength didn't require dominance anymore. And she could feel Silas there too. Not as a presence, but as an absence that had become presence, as a choice that had transformed into legacy. The mark on her neck was no longer burning. It had settled into her skin, become part of her. A reminder that sometimes love looks like sacrifice, and sacrifice looks like freedom, and freedom looks like one person choosing to step aside so that another can step forward. She brought her hand up to her chest, over her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. And somewhere in the space between visibility and invisibility, between the world that was and the world that was becoming, Silas Crown heard her. He had become the foundation upon which she stood. He had become the voice that whispered guidance in moments of doubt. He had become something more powerful than a king could ever be. He had become a legend, a story told to justify mercy, a reason to believe that power could be used differently. The next morning, when the sun rose on the first day of the new territories, Maribel woke to find flowers left at the courthouse steps. Thousands of them, placed by women who understood what had been sacrificed to give them their freedom. Placed by people who wanted to honor the invisible king who had chosen to be forgotten so that others could finally be seen. She gathered some of them, soft white flowers that smelled like rain and possibility, and held them against her chest. "I won't forget you," she said to the morning air. "I won't forget what you gave up. And I promise you, Silas, I will spend every day of my life making it matter." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain and iron. And in that moment, Maribel understood that he wasn't truly gone. He had simply become something different, something that existed in the spaces between breath and heartbeat, something that lived in every merciful choice she made. something that would echo through the generations of women who would grow up free because one man had decided that power was more beautiful when it was given away than when it was held. She wasn't alone. She would never be alone again, because in the act of erasing himself, Silas Crown had become eternal. The end. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as can ever imagine, so do check it out. Hit subscribe. The next story drops soon.